beyond business. I mean, making a move from a country to another country, right, with a business, and eventually with family, and kids, right? This is like a huge decision, right? So I made it my role, or I made it my goal to share what I learned with others, as many others as I can, right? So that others can learn from let's say, mistakes that people make when they move to Silicon Valley. So what expects you in Silicon Valley? What is a Silicon Valley like, right? What does it mean if you have a product here and you want to do business there? What does it mean to you guys, right? And before I start out, I want to take a quick moment to introduce myself, also the way that the mentors did it. I started doing startups in an age where the word startup was not a startup. I started doing it in the year 2000. So fast forwarded and accelerated. I did 4 startups and had 2 exits. 3 startups were in enterprise business, cloud computing. So cloud computing back then was sexy. It was today's AI, machine learning, and blockchain, right? And my last startup was a mobile application. I did startups that I grew organically, and I did startups that I grew with funding. So I know both sides of the story, right? This year, super excited. Actually, we are in the latest revision of my book. It's called Creative Traction. It's a 3-step approach on how I help entrepreneurs bringing innovation to market. Bringing innovation to market is always the biggest challenge still today. 9 out of 10 startups fail because they lack traction, they lack customers, right? Here I have a 3-pillar approach on how to take it to market. I give this courses at the Berkeley, at other accelerators, and also at seminars, workshops, and kind of programs that we're doing today. I have roughly 30-40 articles on the market. You can follow here What It Takes. That's the brand. In Silicon Valley, where I'm based since 2010, I told you previously, born and raised in Italy. Then I moved to Germany, and in 2010 in Silicon Valley. I'm very actively involved with initiatives around startups. Some of the initiatives that are globally more known are the Google Launchpad, The Alchemist, Draper University, right? And obviously other universities such as Berkeley, where I'm a guest lecturer, or an instructor at Berkeley, instructor at Stanford, guest lecturing. So what is it as I do for my daily living? I don't do anything at all, and I enjoy it a lot, right? Joke aside, the last 3 years I started investing into startups, and I saw that there is an entire framework around that. How do you invest into startups? So I decided to switch the side of the table and move more into investments. By now we have a fund of 18 million out of 30. We are going to close it at the beginning of the year. So we are an early stage investment company called Awesome Ventures. So every time that we say awesome, you say ventures. Let's try it. Awesome. Ventures. Awesome. Starts working already. So what we do is we invest in startups that are focused in solving a problem in the mobility industry. Mobility beyond automotive is aviation, maritime, railroad, oil and energy. So we take a traditional industry. So who was the guy that was pitching the Wi-Fi? You guys, right? So we can afterwards we can talk. So we take a look at technologies basically solve a problem in this industry. And but from a technology standpoint, we prefer startups that are data-driven. So data-driven is AI, machine learning, blockchain, computer vision, sensors, robotics. Always things that basically put the human being in the center and creates a new experience for the human being while we go from A to B by using basically a transportation or a mobility service, right? That's what I do for a living. So what's the startup that I'm the most excited about? This is my startup, right? It's an ongoing startup. May I introduce you my CEO to the left? It's my wife, right? Then I have here the data scientist, right? And you may have seen him today on tour with me, David. David, you want to stand up just a second? Today we have him here, my 17-year-old boy. Yes, some of you will wonder how I look, I hear at least, younger than having a 17. I'm in biotech, so I eat my own dog food, you see. This is how you look when you are 40, right? But you look like 30 by eating your own pills, right? I'm kidding. That's another. So I'm the investor in this startup here. and there is no return of investments, right? They consume everything, but I love them, what you want to do, right? Joke aside, so what is lessons, the 9 lessons, I call it the 9 things that really I put together. This is my perspective on Silicon Valley. I want to start out by saying, so Silicon Valley is more than just a location, right? Silicon Valley is an ecosystem. And an ecosystem, for those of you who know, it comes from the biology, which means, the play between the plants and the animals, right? Meaning, okay, if you fit into an ecosystem, great, then you get along with the animals and the plant. But it means also that if you don't fit into the ecosystem, then you die, right? And that's exactly what happens in Silicon Valley. Yeah, Silicon Valley is challenging, Silicon Valley is hard. Silicon Valley has a lot of players in this ecosystem, but you need to be fast in adapting in this ecosystem, right? And the way that you're fast in adapting in this ecosystem is avoid one key pitfall, which is just taking from Silicon Valley. What I mean with taking from Silicon Valley is most of the entrepreneurs, and I admit I was one of them, my Silicon Valley plan was the following. I heard that in Silicon Valley they have multi-billion dollars. I want to raise as much as possible from Silicon Valley, but I love Europe, right? So we'll go there, I will raise money, and I will go back, right? Who of you has similar thoughts? Raise your hands. Who of you is very sincere and has similar thoughts? Raise your hands. Okay, so a couple of you guys. So this is when you start understanding that this is not the right approach, because you're just trying, like every other person that comes to Silicon Valley, just to take information, take network, take money, if you get it at all, right? And people know it. The ecosystem knows it. The ecosystem is aware that there is this so-called tech tourism, right? That just tries to go there, raise dollars, and then do business elsewhere, right? You start being successful in Silicon Valley when you start adding value to Silicon Valley, giving into the community of the entrepreneurs, sharing your lessons learned with them, bringing value to the community. This could look like by sharing the picture of what does it look like doing business in Turkey, or doing business in your industry, or sharing hacks, depending on what's your background, right? But then you start becoming part of this ecosystem when you start sharing what you got to share. That make sense? Okay? That makes sense so far? Right? So instead of basically you going with the mentality and the mindset of only taking, if you would like to accelerate this process of being part of Silicon Valley, right? Of people looking at you and say, yes, Jesus and Mugler, you are a partner of Silicon Valley. Start understanding what is it that you can give to Silicon Valley, right? That's one major learning in terms of the ecosystem. When I got to Silicon Valley, I had printed 1,000 business cards. And I remember after 2 weeks, I went to my wife and I said, hey, Gata. I got that Portuguese means beauty, right? So I said, hey, Gata, that's how I call her. You remember the 1,000 business cards? They're gone. I have to print business cards again. Why? Because what you could do like night and day in Silicon Valley is networking. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of meetups, right? That at the beginning they sound super, super interesting, right? And to be honest and to be fair, you should go through some of them early on. But what's key to those events is that you have to start understanding that it's not the event that brings your business ahead. You have to start understand that basically you really should segment and filter strongly where you spend your time. Because an hour that you spend on an event that doesn't really bring your business ahead, right, is an hour that you lost. So be very self-critic and filter strongly where do you want to hang out. Okay, so niche is better than mass market. Okay, then the other idea that people have to come to Silicon Valley is that people write checks just on events, right? Oh, I'm an investor, I'm this. People, there is a saying, footfall, people who basically you meet on those events, they don't write checks, right? So the best way on you meeting investors, if you're aiming to raise dollars, is to get introductions, and Nathan will have an entire story and strategy around that on how to get it best, right? So don't create this expectation on, oh, I met this guy, right, that on this meetup, that said they can write me a check. This is basically not the common sense or not the common strategy on how you get introduced to somebody who really is raising dollar. The other thing that I want to mention is expectation settings is a tremendously important thing when you go to events. So if you say, Tommaso, I would like to pitch the Silicon Valley way, and I need to practice a lot. I want to get, I want to lose my stage afraidness. I want to be in front of as many people as possible. So your goal is learning how to pitch. Then do as many pitch sessions as you want. Why? Because your goal is pitching. But if your goal is fundraising, or your goal is getting entrepreneurs, getting colleagues, or your goal is getting customers, then you might want to rethink what's your expectation when you pitch. Because do you really raise dollars? Do you really meet your co-founders on such a pitch event? Question mark, right? So be very strict in what you want to achieve. Achieving something is also is very important for the psychology, not just of your psychology, but also for your team. Because usually what happens, and this is what happened to me, back then I had 45 people in Munich sitting, that when they heard that Tommaso was in Silicon Valley, going to one of those pitches that is traditional, what I knew, my team didn't know, because they were here, right? So what they expected was, oh, Tommaso is pitching in Silicon Valley, which sounds tremendously big, which sounds, you have this expectation, he's raising dollars with every pitch that you do, right? Does that make sense? But then, it's not the case. Why is it not the case? Because it's very common that you pitch, and you just pitch for practice, or you just pitch because it's a pitching country, or that's the ecosystem. We pitched it, right? So you were creating this mismatch of expectation that impacted the mood. And we want to keep the mood very high, right? So what are the impulses that keeps your team very high? Be careful and be selective in what kind of event you're going, whom you're going to meet there, okay? And lastly, I think to the event part, what I would like to add is people love to make introductions to other people in Silicon Valley, which has a pro and a con, similar to what I was saying in terms of filtering, right? So the pro is you get to meet and expand your network. You meet one person, you meet the other one person. The question is, because you meet so many people, what does it mean for your business again? When do you close the loop? How do you impact this networking effect, right? Because you meet one person, then you go to the next person, you get another introduction, right? And I ended up having so many introductions, and everybody knew a piece of my business, understood a piece of my business. Oh, you're in e-commerce. I spoke 2 days ago with this guy, I want to make an introduction. Then you go to this guy, oh, you are in a business in the industry of biotech, and he took basically another part of my pitch. I want to make an introduction. So you basically started meeting those people and you learn, but what does it mean for your business? So be very selective, be very critical, and where do you invest your time and who really starts contributing? Why? Because time, we all know, is expensive, but in Silicon Valley, it's horrendous expensive, right? Like literally expensive, okay? So be very careful on that. This is one of the things that if I would have met Tommaso in 2010, I would have loved this advice, right? So number 3, when you meet mentors, when you meet investors, when you meet advisors in Silicon Valley, right? Which, by the way, again, when you go into Silicon Valley, we were discussing it this morning, it's a huge ecosystem, it's a tremendously valuable ecosystem of people living on a daily basis. This is what we're discussing here. So this topic what we're discussing here of innovation, technology, things that when you go outside here, maybe they look at you and say still, I don't understand what you're doing because it's not your industry, right? This is normal there in Silicon Valley. And if you meet, because it's normal, when you meet investors, right, be very specific, very much to the point about how this person might be able to help you. How can I get into an industry? How can I get a co-founder, right? How can I found an investor that invests in e-commerce? Be very specific, because you would like basically to get out to get something out of those conversations. So you have to know how you are making your ask, right? Then this is something that, and I'm talking still a bit about me. Back then I had already exits. I was in a big comfort zone before moving to Silicon Valley. So you're this type of an entrepreneur outside Silicon Valley with, I would associate this more with, hey, we are proud, right? If you do 2 million with no funding, or 3 million revenue with no funding and maybe no co-investor, I mean, this is money here, right? In Silicon Valley, there is a different perspective on what is really money, right, from a size perspective. So you get into Silicon Valley with this, hey, I'm an entrepreneur already. So if Ali asks me a question, usually, back then, I had more this attitude, and when I say I, it's just because I humbly basically share with you the story of me, but I see it in many entrepreneurs coming from outside, that they're trying to defend, almost, right, their business case. Like, hey, who's your customer? Oh, my customers, and how you do? Oh, like when in Silicon Valley somebody asks you, right, it's not about you necessarily defending what you're doing. That's not how communication works in Silicon Valley. It's more about somebody asks you is because they're maybe missing some part of it, and they don't necessarily expect that you go deep in what you're doing as in a response. But basically you absorb and say, oh, this question came up, and we had it here previously, right? This question came up because maybe I might have not been clear the way that I expressed myself, right? In other terms, if you meet an investor and you always defend everything that he's asking you, right? I'm not saying aggressively defend, but there is this friction in the air, right? You are a person that is hard to deal with. And if you're a person who is hard to deal with, the probability of you getting money is much lower if you become a humble kind of a person. And yes, humble means listening. It doesn't mean that everything that Silicon Valley or people in Silicon Valley are saying it's right. This does not mean that. But it means that in a conversation you have to change your attitude compared to what we know here. Does that make sense? That make sense?
What's it here that counts and what is that counts? You said you have to change your attitude.
More humbly, like more listening,
yeah,
right?
Here, like how is it here?
Yeah, that's what I was describing, like more humbly, more listening rather than trying to argument things, right? That's what I noticed in company coming to Silicon Valley from the outside, like too defensive in their business case, right? So that's the point that I want to make, right? So if you are too defensive in your business case, then you don't really get a positive vibe, or you could even say you don't build this empathy moment, right? And these are things, by the way, that people don't tell you. They're not telling you because there are thousands of startups. So I talk with you, and I don't need to say, oh, you could have answered differently. Why should I say that, right? I don't say it to you, right? But I just listen, and for us who live there, we basically filter, did this person, you remember the ecosystem example, behaving already in a way that the ecosystem is expected, right? And these are subtle things that you understand once you start living there. Does that make sense? Or is it too disconnected from reality? Right? So that's basically what my point number 3 is, right? The point that I want to make is, be less the entrepreneur with proud, and that's what I built, but more the entrepreneur with humbleness and say, hey, yes, I've built this, but I want to learn again. I want to learn differently. And it is hard. For me, it was tremendously hard. Because after 10 years of doing business and then moving over there, or 11 years of doing business, you had already a decade of experiences of doing startups, right? So you think you know. We think we know. But when you get to Silicon Valley, you start understanding Not that you don't know, I'm not saying that. But the point I'm making is that we still have to learn a lot. Okay? Number 4. Again, picture this situation. You have a team, I don't know, here I had it, who is the guy here in the back? I forgot your name and I'm so blind to see your name. What's his name here in the back? You have 120 people working for you?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you have 120 people working for you, right, you have a certain responsibility, you have a certain character that you have built, right? And you always have a certain, let's say, culture that you build around your company, the way that you deal with the people, the way that you employ the people, what you do with your colleagues, right? And I was similar. I had 45 people back then. And for me, people means I had employees. And actually, if you go to Silicon Valley and you want to do the startup thing, like you want to behave like a startup, right? And you're going to start hiring or treating people like normal employees, just oh, this is my employee. You're not going to get far ahead. Why? Because in Silicon Valley, you are a team. Now, what does it mean? You hire team members, you build team members, you scale with team members. This starts out by how you divide your equity between the companies. Who of you owns more than 90% of the company? Raise your hand. This in Silicon Valley you don't see. Because you always have 2 founders, and at least they have 70-30 or 50-50, right? Why? Because this is an expectation of Silicon Valley. This shows that you basically don't are hiring just people to be your employee. You're building things together. That's basically what I'm saying here. We are in this together, right? And I know that from a perspective of non-Silicon Valley company, this might make sense, but you might reconsider this. What kind of signals are you conveying when you go to a place where this is not common, right? So reconsider that, right? And analyze what is the expectation. And I meant the expectation is hiring team members, building team members, right? Being more the one, even the co-founder, being more the service provider to your colleagues, right? That's what I used to say in my company is I'm the service provider to my colleagues, to my team members, right? I don't hire employees. I'm not looking for employees, right? So you would like basically to build this different mentality and mindset, which creates this word culture, the different culture in a company. And in the United States, in Silicon Valley, the topic of creating a mindset of a team is tremendously important because it is very, very challenging to make it through the ups and downs that a startup has. And not only that, the difference between here and there is there in Silicon Valley, if you have a down and you don't act like a team member, you don't have the skill as a founder, as a co-founder to build a team, people go to the next door, to the next desk, and they have the next startup. Because it's simply startup work, right? So you have to start understanding what means retention from a cultural perspective, right? Share the cake. One of the good strategies is that we see over and over again in terms of team building. I mean, if you go to Silicon Valley, you decide to go to Silicon Valley and be part of this country or location of opportunities, right? What we see often and is well accepted is the fact that you have development somewhere else, for instance here in Turkey, right? Decentralized, for instance, sales and marketing, right? Depending on which country you wanna build your sales and marketing. Say you wanna grow something in United States, then you need the sales and marketing in United States. If you wanna continue also in Turkey, then you need also something in Turkey. But what works well is well seen, especially from an investor perspective, if your management is in Silicon Valley or comes from Silicon Valley, right? You want to think about product. I mean, product, and Beza will talk about it, UI, UX, for instance, or product strategy, tech strategy, right? I mean, they're really, that's core knowledge to Silicon Valley, right? The question for you is, as an entrepreneur to recognize what your weaknesses are, right? So what's my weakness? Is product UI UX my weakness? Question mark. I don't know, right? This is your SWOT analysis that you have to do. And if this is the case, and you build a team member in the United States, it adds value to what? To the company. And then the people who want to acquire you, and if you want to have who wants to have an exit in United States? In United States. Only out. 2. Rest, don't care. Exit. Who wants to be acquired in United States? Somebody who acquires you in United States, right? So what becomes an asset is not beyond the product, is the team, because they acquire people, right? So if you have people who are already part of the ecosystem, and I mean the Silicon Valley ecosystem, knowing what's going on, they love to acquire it. And actually, this I could take into the next level of explication. That Silicon Valley is the only place where if you fail, you can still make money. So, who of you have heard of the word acqui-hire? Acqui-hire is basically, imagine that you built your product, you got it to a certain point, usually you don't have enough traction, but you have beyond the prototype, you have beyond an MVP, you have some initial customers, you are specified in a certain domain, right? You have maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 engineers, right? Working on this, some part-time, some full-time, right? But then you don't raise your next round or a round at all, and then you say, shoot, what is it that we do? Well, you get, ideally, acqui-hire. And acqui-hire you can get between $500,000 and $1.5 million per engineer. And acqui-hire means equity hire. So they hire you, they pay the engineer. You know, Google, Facebook, and Amazon will basically pay the fact that you have a team that you get well along, and they've been there and they've done that, and they have the startup mentality, the lean process, right? And they acqui-hire, and you get 6, 7, 8 billion with 0 in revenue. Which, how much profit do you need to make here? How much profit do you need to make here to get 6, 7, 8 million in acquisition? Profit, right? Right? Not the right? Profit to get 6, 7. It's a good acquisition, right? 6, 7, 8. It's what? It's times 6. It's almost 8 is almost 50 million, right? And this you do with 0 in revenue with a failed company, right? So you want to think about your strategy and who is your team. Another point here towards the team, what people don't tell you. You know, you have heard about this term, right? A-team? Have you heard about this term, A-team? Nobody has heard about the term, you need an A-team? Yeah? Right? A-team, right? You need an A-team. When you hire, you need an A-team, right? An A-team hires only A-team. You know, this you read thousands of those articles, right? And I was always, you know, everybody that pitched in Silicon Valley has obviously the slide with the team, and then you see the title, we have an A-team, right? Like everybody has an A-team, right? And it took me really, and I was like, well, everybody has an A-team, right? But at the end, if you really look into the teams, I don't know if they're A-teams, question mark, right? You start basically having your thoughts around it and saying, well, what is an A-team? How do you build this A-team? What are things that really matter to be perceived as an A-team? Or what I started understanding is what are things that really trigger or checkbox the yeses with the investors or the mentors or advisors who want eventually to be part of yours to recognize, say, hey, this is really an A-team in Silicon Valley, right? And one of the things that you don't hear a lot is, so first of all, the more engineers you have, the better it is. Many people that are not Silicon Valley oriented, most of them are just business oriented case. Who has business background, a purely business, non-engineering background? Raise your hands. And the most of you have engineer? So this is already a big advantage in Silicon Valley if the teams are engineering oriented, right? So it is harder just for business people to do or raise money there in terms of the majority of the team, right? And the other thing is, where did you graduate, right? Again, this is something that investor wouldn't tell you, but if you have my computer science did his MBA at MIT and at Stanford and Berkeley, if you have this kind of a team, they love it, The reason why they love it is because what it means, it's not just that you have a